to meeting number 4 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either French, English, or floor. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Today we're examining Canada's Arctic strategy pursuant to Standing Order 106(2) and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 23, 2025. The committee is meeting on the study of Canada's Arctic strategy. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour. From Inuit Circumpolar Council of Canada, Mr. Herb Nakumayak, President, and from Oceans North, Dr. Sheena Kennedy, Executive Director. Welcome to the committee, and up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed to rounds of questions from the members. Merci beaucoup. Welcome. Bienvenue.
Kuyunani, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for having us here today. My name is Herb Nakumayak. I'm from Paulatuk Northwest Territories, which is in the Inuvialuit Settlement Region. I'm the newly appointed interim president of the Inuit Circumpolar Council of Canada. ICC Canada advocates on behalf of Inuit from the 4 Inuit regions in Canada, the Inuvialuit Settlement Region, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut, collectively termed the Inuit Nunagat. We are taxpayers, rights holders within the Inuit Nunagat, protecting, stewarding, and preserving the lands and coasts, waters, and the ice that make up our home. We are the sister organization of Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, the national organization representing the rights and interests of Inuit in Canada. We have lived in our circumpolar homeland since time immemorial. As such, our Indigenous knowledge is central to who we are in the regions in which we live. Internationally, ICC is an Indigenous peoples organization that represents Inuit in our circumpolar homeland, inclusive of Canada, Alaska, Greenland, and Chukotka, part of the Russian Federation. We do so at the United Nations as permanent participants to the Arctic Council, and we are permanent consultative status member at the International Maritime Organization, among many other fora. Mr. Chair, in 2024 Arctic foreign policy, the 2024 Arctic foreign policy must be implemented with regular and ongoing engagement with Inuit. This work is most effectively managed through engagement at the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee and with regional Inuit treaty organizations, which includes the leaders from the 4 Inuit treaty organizations. There is no sovereignty or security in the Arctic without engaging and first protecting its people. Canada's Arctic sovereignty depends on Inuit use and occupancy across our lands, sea ice, airspace, and waters. I'd like to highlight a couple of key areas to focus on, Mr. Chair. Firstly, for Inuit in Canada, mixed or dual-use infrastructure is critically important. Canada is committed to a year-round military presence in the Arctic, along with identification of major projects that include the Port of Churchill, Manitoba, revitalization and early-stage Arctic economic and security corridor strategy. There are many opportunities for investment in Inuit communities and also represent investment in the Arctic and security and sovereignty. Mr. Chair, Inuit also recognize the changing geopolitical landscape that has increased interest in our lands, waters, and ice. With Inuit having long advocated for the peaceful use of and preservation of the Arctic, it's pivotal that Canada continues to recognize the ongoing commitments to multilateralism, diplomacy, and good governance in support of a safe and governed Arctic. To note, ICC Canada will be assuming the 4-year ICC chairship next summer at the quadrennial ICC General Assembly in Iqaluit, Nunavut, convening Inuit from Canada, Alaska, Greenland, and Chukotka. Mr. Chair, we call upon Canada to ensure its commitments to Arctic collaboration and diplomacy. As ICC Canada's chairship of the ICC will overlap with Canada's next chairship of the Arctic Council, we look forward to collaborative opportunities for stewarding shared goals in Arctic multilateralism. To be sure, Canada's continued support allows us to voice and gain support for a secure Canadian Arctic. Inuit work closely with many Arctic and non-Arctic states, other Arctic and Northern Indigenous peoples as part of the Canada's delegation for many agreements in the international fora. Mr. Chair, I'd remind the committee that the work to implement the goals for the Arctic foreign policy needs to be based on the work that Inuit have been and are already doing to leverage on existing relationships, capacities, and knowledge systems. Engagement through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee, along with engagement with the states of the Arctic Council and the United Nations, allows us to represent Inuit rights and priorities right here at home and around the world. We look forward to building on this work with Her Excellency Virginia Mearns, Canada's newly appointed Arctic Ambassador. Mr. Chair, I'm reminded every day that the pace of change in our homeland is gaining momentum. The opportunity that Canada has to work in tandem with Inuit to secure our Arctic is unique. It is achieved by involving Inuit in the decision-making process and securing long-term sustainable funding for Inuit communities to build strong economies. In addition, by learning about our realities as rights holders, hunters, boat owners, guardians, and experts in our regions, the Government of Canada can implement an Arctic foreign policy that serves the needs of the nation and keep us strong in the face of adversity. Kuinani, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, President Nakimayak.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président. Juste un petit.
One moment, Chair, just a very friendly reminder to perhaps slow down the pace of speaking a little bit, because I believe my friend, the interpreter, had some difficulty catching her breath.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Simard. Now invite Dr. Kennedy to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. My name is Dr. Sheena Kennedy, and I'm here on behalf of Oceans North, where I serve as Executive Director. I'd like to acknowledge my friend, Mr. Herb Nakamayak, and congratulate him on his recent appointment as Interim President of ICC Canada. Oceans North supports marine conservation and climate action in partnership with Indigenous and coastal communities. Over the last 15 years, our collaborative and science-based approach has led to tangible outcomes for Arctic communities, including contributing to the protection of over 650,000 square kilometers of marine area, the establishment of the Tellertup-Amanga National Marine Conservation Area, the successful conclusion of the SENA Agreement between the Kikitani Inuit Association and the Government of Canada, and a network of Indigenous-led science, monitoring, and other research projects which support the well-being of Arctic communities across the Canadian North and in Greenland. Canada demonstrated leadership in releasing a new Arctic foreign policy in 2024, and I'd like to commend this committee on its decision to review it now. In this period of transformative, unparalleled change, the regular study of our approach to the opportunities and challenges facing the Arctic is both urgent and necessary. I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge the essential role that Canada's new Arctic ambassador will play as the Arctic becomes an even greater theatre of geopolitical interest. At this time, when global powers are showing renewed interest in the Arctic, Canada's approach to policy in this region must underscore that diplomacy is our first line of defence. Canada should remain committed to the principles of peace, stability, and rules-based international order. Canada and its Arctic allies have always found ways to cooperate on matters of mutual interest. For example, the unprecedented precautionary agreement to regulate fishing in the Central Arctic Ocean is an example of this exceptional multilateralism. Building on the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement to address emerging industrial activities such as transpolar shipping and deep-sea mining in the Central Arctic Ocean would strengthen multilateral cooperation in this highly sensitive and globally significant region. Canada should also continue to strengthen its relationships across the circumpolar world. With Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark, Canada could establish bilateral agreements on matters of trade, environmental protection, defense, and science and monitoring. The rapid establishment of the bilateral Picala-Sorsawac Protected Area, also known as the Northwater Polinia, which is located between northern Baffin Island and northwest Greenland, would strengthen communication, data and knowledge sharing, and monitoring capabilities between both regions. To support this process, we recommend that Canada expedite the establishment of an Arctic consulate in Nuuk and work with the newly appointed Canadian and Greenlandic Arctic ambassadors, as well as ITK and ICC, to identify a shared set of priorities for Arctic diplomacy and cooperation. As you heard from Herb, Arctic peoples have always lived in deep connection with the marine environment and are on the forefront of climate change and biodiversity loss. Their knowledge and experience must inform all policies and decisions the Government of Canada undertakes with regard to the Arctic, their homeland. Arctic waters are seeing exponential increases in vessel traffic as climate change drives sea ice retreat. Robust management of shipping in Canada's EEZ is essential to avoiding accidents such as the recent grounding of the HMS Thamesborg and deleterious impacts to the marine environment. But most relevant to this discussion today, a more robust system for managing Arctic shipping would enhance Canada's domain awareness in the Northwest Passage at this critical time. In the Arctic, In the Arctic, the Canadian Coast Guard and Canadian Rangers play an essential role in monitoring and contributing to the federal government's awareness and surveillance of the region. To perform this function at a caliber sufficient to meet this moment, both programs require adequate and scaled resourcing. The existing network within Arctic communities already contributes greatly to our domain awareness in the Arctic, but for deeper knowledge, expertise, on-the-ground capacity, and durability, the federal government must invest in best-in-class infrastructure, equipment, and training to fully realize the potential of these important programs. All of these efforts would serve multiple purposes and contribute to meeting many federal priorities while supporting Inuit sovereignty. I'll just close by saying I'm deeply appreciative of the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy, for your opening statement and your remarks. I will now open the floor for questions, and we will begin with MP Hoback. You have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. It was nice to visit with you before the committee, and yeah, I do have a few questions. I'm just kind of curious, how do the Inuits' vision for the North align with the Arctic policy? Is there things that you would look at and say this isn't aligning, or is there areas that need more construction or more work?
Thank you, Mr. Hoback, for your question. I would say that during the development, Inuit definitely played a role in the development of the Canada's Arctic foreign policy, and we want to ensure that that as we move ahead, that what's happening in the Arctic are reflective of our way of life, ensuring that that there's in fact security amongst Inuit in our homes, that we feel safe living in the place we live. As you know, there's been a lot of pressure this year in attention in the Arctic, and we want to ensure that we are not left behind, and that there's no gap between Canada and Inuit as we develop further develop policy and implement policy, that we are at the table as well too. In that way, we ensure that the decisions that are made are reflective of the region that we're actually making those decisions in. So we see it as a win-win for Canada and Inuit when we implement policy together. In fact, like with any organization, any government, we want to ensure that we are there in peace, and we want it to remain that way. And we feel that right now we are aligned, and we want to continue that alignment to ensure that we are making, in fact, the right decisions.
As you do with Inuit from the other countries, in like Russia, for example, and you see the development that's happening in the Russian side of the polar side, would you say that they are aligned with what you see as far as a vision for the region?
I can only speak for Canada. I say that Inuit in the 4 other regions are certainly working with their with their states. I feel that Canada, we are certainly leading the way, as there's a lot of engagement between the government and Canada, but we can only advocate so much for another country, but ensure that when we do advocate, that we are ensuring that there's also peace on that side as best we can, without putting anyone in any of the ICCs or the people in a place where they don't want to be.
Ms. Kennedy, you talked about making sure we have the proper infrastructure, the ability to properly monitor the region as we see more ships going through the region, and mapping and mining mapping and stuff like that. Do you think Canada would have to, somewhere down the road, have a role where they actually will enforce that territory, enforce bad actors so that they're not participating in illegal mining or illegal activity in the region? How do you see that unfolding, I guess?
Well, I think to start, investments in a lot of communities through the Arctic, and Herb can speak to this from his region, are actively doing a lot of the monitoring and search and rescue and emergency preparedness through that region. And I think investments in new vessels and perhaps docks and other infrastructure would really allow for an expansion of people that have local knowledge and local experience to play that role. But I do think that leadership from Canada will also be required to meet the moment.
You made the comment about dual use ports, for example, Churchill. I agree with you 100%. If you're going to spend the money, it has to have a civilian aspect to it, plus a military aspect to it, somewhere down the road. So that's something I think everybody around this room would probably agree with. As we look at more players in the north, though, the military aspect, I know the Americans have a lot of interest. In fact, I'd almost say they're paranoid about the activity going on in the north. How do you see our role playing in that environment?
Thank you for that. I see Canada's role, especially for Inuit in Canada, like, this year, there's likely one of the record number of ice-breaking vessels which are not from, I would say, other countries that have shown interest, that have been patrolling and outside into international waters. And I think for us to play a role in when it comes to dual use, we need to ensure that there's, in fact, how do we add that civilian part of this? Well, you look at any airport in the country. There's a secure side of it, and also, there may be a detached side. But for us, we need to ensure that we're developing policy and regulations so that it's actually feasible for both sides, for Department of National Defense use and for civilian use. Looking at those, breaking down those both aspects of those are really key to ensure that you're developing the right policy. And I see us playing a role together where we, in fact, when it comes to the Arctic Council, we are involved when it comes to search and rescue, and giving advice to countries to ensure that, let's look at this area where Canada, there's such a lack of sometimes response, like in any part of the Arctic, and to do that together, we need to ensure that we're actually ensuring that we're looking at the polar code, looking at the types of vessels that are coming through our regions, and how do we accommodate those best when there may be could be a spill, it could be just as Sheena mentioned earlier, the Timsburg ship going aground. How are we going to react to those, and how are we going to react to it safely so that we can ensure the environment is protected, and not just people too. For us, we rely on migratory species, beluga whales, chars, seals. And we want to ensure that, that one spill doesn't make a positive, massive impact on a species where it might change their migration route for a long time until that site is actually cleaned up. So we're thinking about all of those things, and developing sound policy together and regulations when it comes to shipping is really important, especially for us in our region. Thank you.
For that. I'll now go to MP Fortier.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be speaking French, so I will give you a few moments to attach your headset so that you can follow. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the interpreters for their support so that we can have this conversation today. Thank you very much, Nakumik. Thank you for being here today and for sharing your expert knowledge with us. As a committee, we have the opportunity to study this issue very closely and come up with tangible recommendations to guide the government and other partners to continue efforts designed to protect the Arctic and enhance its role. I'll begin with a question that might seem very open, but it will allow us to put some topics on the table. Who represents or what represents the largest threat to Canada in the Arctic? Who are our closest allies? Who can we work with and who's a threat? Mr. Nakimayak, please, and then Professor Kennedy.
So when it comes to allies, certainly, our partnership with the USA, has been one through time that we've always relied on as Canadians, and it's become sort of a brand through our lifetime until recently, when now that with the geopolitical state of this world, we need to ensure that we, even though there may be disagreements at certain levels of government, there's also working levels where they're actually working quite well. And those are the ones that we kind of need to look at and say, well, how do we continue that? Through time, we're going to need to work together at one time or another, or continue working regardless of what a relationship is between states. So we look at countries like that who certainly are our neighbors. For us, for myself, my family migrated from Alaska and ended up in Canada, and as Inuit, certainly there are ties when it comes to indigenous peoples. For myself, I can speak for ICC. We across the Inuit Circumpolar Council, we advocate for the 180,000 Inuit in the circumpolar world. And we have relations with Inuit in Russia, in Alaska and Greenland and other places. So our dialogue is continued with them regardless. When it comes to state, then when we attend Arctic Council, Central Atlantic Ocean fisheries negotiations, plastics negotiations, treaties, and forums like that. We come as a state with Canada, so our message is always aligned with Canada, so that we ensure that we are in this together. And we need to be strong. If we're gonna work with our allies, we need to ensure that we have a strong foundation here at home, so that we can provide that support to each other, so that we are in fact there to implement our mandate. When it comes to threats, certainly there was quite a number of icebreakers out from certain countries that were like, wow, a very big interest. And when it comes to research on the Arctic, I think it's sort of a new race for a lot of countries that want to see what's there. When it comes to the Central Atlantic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, there are 10 countries as well. There's countries that include the European Union. So there's a lot of interest, a lot at stake. And for us, it is our we could define a threat. Sometimes we see a threat as a vessel, like just most recently there was a ship aground. That is for sure. For us, we want to ensure that our rights, because we believe that we are part of the ecosystem, and we want to ensure that when there's research being conducted, that they're following the guidelines that are put out in front. So we do our best to remind countries and states that, look, there are some regulations in place for the CAO. We're definitely developing that platform, and we want that, as the best representative for us in Canada. We want to, my day job, we manage the marine environment, which is in the Inuit region, and we want our national programs to sort of be recognized and mirrored on the offshore, so that there's, in fact, proven, collaboration, coordination, co-management, and co-leading research. That if we can do that here in our own country, then we can actually do that on the offshore as well too. So we need to, like I said, a threat could be anything or anyone.
I really appreciate your response. Unfortunately, I only have 6 minutes, but I understand that what you're sharing is really important for us to hear. And I might just give a chance to Dr. Kennedy to also answer or try to answer that question.
Sure. I think in addition to what Herb has just said, I do really think that climate change is a major threat to the Arctic, and it's one that Inuit understand deeply and live every day. I think that the changing climate is allowing for the recession of ice, and that creates opportunities for increased shipping through the Northwest Passage. And I do think that environmental protection is akin to security, in that if we don't have healthy communities and a healthy environment, and we don't have pathways for the movement of vessels through the Arctic, for example, that we are increasing our risks, both as a region and as a country.
Thank you very much. Next, Monsieur Simard, vous avez 6 minutes.
Mr. Simard, you have 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. Thank you, Mr. Nakimayak. You no doubt know that the government hopes to increase defense spending, perhaps as high as 5%. And to attain that, they want to establish infrastructure linked to critical minerals. NATO plans to establish a list of critical minerals, but all that would require infrastructure for critical minerals. As you know, a significant portion of critical minerals that are of interest are to be found in the north. I would like to know whether you, the Inuit, are engaged in discussions with the government, both on the infrastructure issue and with regard to some critical strategic mineral mining projects. You talked about foreign threats. Does that backdrop, that context, not represent a new foreign threat that could jeopardize respect for sovereignty in the Arctic? I would like to hear your views on issues relating to critical strategic minerals.
Thank you, Queen Aini. Mr. Smart, for your question. As you know, we represent the Inuit internationally, and we do have 4 Inuit treaty organizations who are, in fact, working with the government, I would say, in the Grays Bay area, the Slave Geological Province, which is just north of the capital of the Northwest Territories and going into Nunavut. There's great interest there, and there's also shipping from the Mary River mine as well too. So any development when it comes to critical minerals and developing that infrastructure, we know that there is such a lack of infrastructure in the Arctic, but in being strategic, not just for Canada, but for Inuit as well too. So working closely with the Inuit treaty organizations will really enhance the ability to become maybe more successful in finding a good logistical point for it. And when it comes to we know that critical minerals play a big role right now all around this world, and we're going in that direction. We want to ensure that that there's proper environmental reviews, a proper process to ensure that consultation, first and foremost, is at the forefront of any type of development in the planning, and so having Inuit involved is key to ensure the success both for Canada and for the people such as Inuit who reside along those shipping lanes and ports. Port-to-port infrastructure is important. We want to ensure that we have that ability here in Canada, and also Inuit have a major role in developing that. When it comes to foreign threats, backdrop, of course, when any type of infrastructure is developed, there's going to be interest, and there will be for sure. We are seeing that through time. For us to feel safe and secure, we need to ensure that we're doing this well with Canada. And any type of threat would certainly jeopardize any types of operation. It's not a life or death thing, but we want to ensure that there's health and safety along the way. Not, like I said, not just for the people, but also for the environment, which is really key. Thank you.
Est-ce que Madame Kennedy voudrait répondre?
Would Dr. Kennedy like to add something, answer the question as well?
I think the only thing I would add is that, when you speak about the threat to sovereignty and the relationship with critical minerals, I think that's something that Canada and Greenland share. And if through your consideration of this policy that you chose to engage more with Greenland on some of these shared priorities, I think that's something that would be of interest on the other side of Baffin Bay as well as this side. And I would just echo that the creation of the enabling infrastructure to allow for the development of mining in the Arctic is also a shipping issue, because everything that goes from the Arctic out requires trans-Arctic shipping. So I think that's something to take quite seriously as we imagine what the impacts of mining development will be through the Arctic.
Monsieur Nakiyamak, est-ce qu'à votre connaissance,
Mr. Nakiyamak, to your knowledge, at present, are there strategic critical mineral projects involving the Inuit community?
Kuyanani, for your question. As of now, the Northwest Territories, where I'm from, there are certainly not with the Inuit, but in southern part of the Northwest Territories, but there are certainly talks of that in our regions, and development of ports would sort of fall in line with that. So I'm sure there are initial conversations that are happening and that need to occur to ensure that first and foremost sovereignty is also a part of it.
et je terminerai, je sais qu'il ne me reste pas beaucoup de temps.
I'll end on this. I'm almost out of time. To ensure sovereignty of the North, what it takes is presence in the territory. Do natural resource development projects not represent a way of being present in the region?
I didn't get that last part, sorry.
Je vous demandais si on dit
I
souvent
was asking, well, it's often said that one way of protecting sovereignty is by occupying the territory, by being present. Don't you believe that natural resource projects are one way of occupying the territory?
Yes, I agree with you. And we have the Canadian Rangers and we have Inuit, and we need to ensure that that we are all a part of it when it comes to it. But occupying for sure would certainly enhance the security in our country.
Thank you very much. We will now move to MP Abul Taif. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for witnesses for appearing before committee. You must have already read the Arctic Foreign Policy. December 2024 was introduced by Minister of Foreign Affairs. The obvious question is, was there anything in the policy that you think is missing? Or was there anything that you wish was included in that policy? And of course, I'll start with Dr. Kennedy and move to Mr. Nakimayak after that.
I believe that the policy is very comprehensive. I was very pleased to see the consideration of the environment directly in the policy, and I think that there is a lot more that we can do together to inform how the policy is implemented, the role of science and monitoring, the inclusion of Inuit in the implementation of the policy. And as I've said, I do think that there's a lot of opportunity in there for multilateralism and connecting that to environmental protection and security. And that could be done through Canada's support for the Central Arctic Ocean, a new Central Arctic Ocean agreement.
Mr. Nakimayak.
Thank you for your question. I think since the naming of the consulates in Nuuk and in Anchorage have been great. When it comes to funding, that's always an issue for Inuit organizations. The cost of living certainly is being reflected. I think when it comes to our knowledge systems, that's really basically the vein of our existence. Traditional knowledge, we call it Indigenous knowledge, Inuit knowledge, Inuvialuit knowledge. We've been negotiating a lot with Canada and other states, ensuring that our knowledge systems are intact. And I think sometimes better understanding of our knowledge systems, with committees such as this and others, could really benefit in ensuring that the decisions that are made or recommendations to developing policy and regulations would really help, especially in the Arctic. And that's where, for us in the marine environment, could improve. and ensuring that our regulations are strong and sound and they're reflective of areas of importance for Inuit. When we start to see ships dumping in our waters before they go to Alaska or go to Nunavut or to another country, then we, of course, that's a sign. So looking at signs like that are happening in real life are really, really important to kind of take a look and understand and maybe break that down. So how do we improve this, and what approach do we take? Usually we want Canada to take this approach with Inuit to ensure that, in fact, sound. Thank you.
So the banking on the Inuit community and the indigenous communities in the north is very, very critical. And you've mentioned diplomacy as the best way to approach that, which is on the political side could be very difficult, especially with the practice of Russia these days and the relationship with Russia. On the other side, we see the community expand beyond Canadian borders to the other partners in the Arctic. So that level of cooperation that you mentioned could have a positive impact and could have a negative impact. Would you be able to clarify to us what are the positives in that cooperation and what are the negatives could be or potentially could be? And again, the question to both of you, I'll start with Dr. Kennedy.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I think that the lessons of the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement are important here because very unlikely allies were able to come together to agree on an area of mutual strategic interest. It's not often that you get the US and Russia signing on to the same agreements, and I think that this is an example of when everyone has sort of collective interest, but also collective risk, then you can come to an agreement to proceed with caution, which is really what the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement is. I would say that a new agreement basically sets out the rules for what people can do and what they can't do in a space, and you come to, and then a process for determining when we might decide and how, what are the rules that would determine how we might ship through that region or not. And I think that creates a different type of agreement than a more political one. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We will now go next to MP Van Del Belt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for being here today. I would like to start with you, Mr. Nakimayak. I was on this committee 6 years ago when you testified in our last study for this on the Arctic, and of course 6 years, a lot has changed, and I'd be really interested. I mean, first of all, I appreciate what you said about the sovereignty and the people. And I think this was something that, a point that you and others made last time, that if people are receiving Canadian healthcare, Canadian EI, Canadian social insurance numbers, if that's, then this is Canadian territory, and that the people are really core to that. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on what may have changed in the interim in these last 6 years. Particularly, I know that the Russian Federation, that the Inuit people that live in that territory are part of your council. If there has been any political pressure, if there's been any shift that would reflect the geopolitical shifts that have happened since our last study.
Thank you for that question. It's nice to see you again. I think a lot has changed for us, for Inuit. The interest in our regions in the Arctic it's tenfold of the attention that we're getting because we are the western gate of the Northwest Passage. We're seeing all of these pleasure crafts coming through. Of course, those that has changed a lot, and it's come to think about what kind of environmental impacts can happen to our communities. We're talking about. For us, we're talking about environmental impacts as well too. The eroding shoreline. I mentioned to one of your colleagues earlier that we've certainly found artifacts in our region that predate about 700 years. And this is from whaling and that. So through time, the interest for us, we want to ensure that our homelands are protected. Ensuring that whether it's cruise ship operators, navies from wherever they may be, are certainly consulting with us as Inuit, ensure that, look, we're going to be in your region. Let's have that dialogue. And I think I may be speaking to other departments, saying that if that's the case, then we need to certainly we can contribute to whether these patrols or whatever they may be could be more impactful for Canada and the partnerships that you have. So there's been a lot of joint research planning, and that's what we are seeing, and that's the avenue that they're taking to show interest in our regions for sure.
And with the changing relationship with Russia, has that had impact on your council? Just go ahead. Yeah, you can.
Yes, yeah, it certainly has. You know, we most recently, you know, we were granted permanent consultative status at the International Maritime Organization, which is shipping. So certainly countries like that, like Russia, have certainly put the pressure on as Inuit and why we are there. But we want to ensure that the Inuit in Russia are safe as well too. So we do our best to work diplomatically to ensure that their lives are protected, and then the health and well-being and safety of them of all Inuit is equal. Not there's no one or less or other, but we look at that. That's how we look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a short time to, I'd like to go to you, Dr. Kennedy. You mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned, the link between environment, climate change, and security. And Canada has recognized that climate change is a national security issue. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit about the way in which the changes that are happening in the oceans, in the climate, are impacting Canada's national security interests.
I think that we are facing the relationship between our collective well-being and the environment. There are a lot of. We also work with a lot of coastal communities in Atlantic Canada. They are seeing a lot of changes in their livelihoods and in their communities. There's Herb spoke about coastal erosion. That's happening all over. And I think that when you have environmental protections in place, you have eyes and ears on the water, you have monitoring, you have science, you have management, and that creates a greater sense of security for people. We can't really feel secure, I also believe, without the right information. And we have a lot of science, but there's a lot we don't know, and particularly in the north, there's information that we actually really need to be able to understand what the impacts are. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you very much. Monsieur Simard, vous avez 2 minutes.
Mr. Simard, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Can you hear me? I understand what you're saying, that climate change and geopolitical issues with Russia may be the threats that are most concerning to you. The committee will have to prepare a report. If you were to make short-term recommendations, be it recommendations to become more resilient to climate change or on measures that could be put in place in a geopolitical context that is now different, because the past 5-6 years have been different to what we've seen in the past. What would those recommendations to the committee look like, both on geopolitics and climate change?
Just a light question. Well, on climate change, I would start with the rapid decarbonization of the maritime industry. I think that is a huge one. Maintaining Canada's commitments to our climate targets and looking to our partners in the European Union for how they are decarbonizing their shipping, I think would be something that would be worthwhile for this committee to consider. And I have a deep bench on this in my organization, so we'd be happy to provide insights if that's helpful. And I do believe that the kind of this notion of Arctic exceptionalism, which I know some people are questioning in our kind of new environment, I think we need to hold on to that, because this is a strategically important place where parties have come together in the past, and I think we should take that very seriously.
Merci. Même chose peut-être s'il me reste un court moment.
Thank you. If I have a moment, I would put the same questions to Mr. Nakimayak. Do you have a brief comment, a recommendation that you believe should be in the committee's upcoming report?
Yeah, thanks. I would say, in short, it's nice that we sit here in the committee, but also, maybe having advisors from Inuit regions be involved in this would be really, really helpful to ensure that you're, in fact, doing the right thing as you move ahead.
Thank you. Next is MP Michael Chong. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. It's good to see you. I haven't been up in the north for a few years, but I look forward to coming back at some point. I had a memorable trip, actually, hiking up the Weasel River across Baffin Island several years ago, and never did I think it would take that long to climb up and down moraines and across glacial rivers, but we got it done and got back to Pangerton, and a good warm meal was never more welcome. But I'm not sure if you can answer the following question. If you can't, that's fine. I just want to ask it. Are you familiar with some of the race that's on to lay undersea water cables between Europe and Asia, and between Europe and North America, as well as in the Russian sphere of the Arctic?
Thank you for that question. I can tell you probably some stories about hiking that are really entertaining as well too. I have a partner who forgot a few things, but it's good to see that you're there and you see the landscape, you see the vastness of it. When it comes to underwater cabling, I know in our region, because we're right at the mouth of the Mackenzie River, which is one of the biggest rivers, one of the top biggest rivers in the world. So, and there's a changing the permafrost. It's such a changing environment down below there in the seabed that it's insecure to actually run a line across it. So we know that is a risk. When it comes to others, I'm sure that the need to connect is important. Also, that leaves the question: do we have the technology to monitor those lines that are put down as Canada, where other countries may have submarines and other types of surveillance that could certainly have that impact. So I think that we need to ensure.
I'm referencing, there's a Russian project called the Polar Express Cable to lay cable across the Russian sphere of the Arctic. There are two proposals to run cables, one of which would go through the Canadian Arctic from European-led consortiums. One is the Far North Fiber project, which is a consortium between Finland, companies in Finland, the United States, and Japan that would lay a cable between Europe and Asia. And the other is a cable that would run through the Canadian Arctic called Polar Connect that would run between Europe and North America. And I'm wondering if you are at all aware of those projects that are being proposed.
We certainly hear a little bit of the wording, but not fully aware or involved right now at this time.
I have a different question to ask. In the government's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework Statement, one of the three priorities was to come to some finality on Canada's international border. We've had disputes with the United States in the Beaufort Sea. We've long had a dispute with the Kingdom of Denmark on Hans Island and the waters surrounding that island. And the government committed, I think, in its most recent Arctic foreign policy to begin negotiations with the United States on the Beaufort Sea boundary, and then to finalize the boundary between Canada and Denmark around Hans Island. Could you comment on either one of those two boundary disputes?
In all fairness, we do. in this instance right now, at this time and moment in time, I would encourage you to work with the Nunavut Regional Corporation, who is leading those investigations, and we certainly want to support however we can. But you would have to take that up with the Nunavut Regional Corporation.
In other words, you haven't heard anything about the launch of negotiations with the United States over the Beaufort Sea boundary, or where we're at with finalizing the boundary with Denmark? Is that
haven't really as of lately.
What about you, Dr. Kennedy? Nothing either? Okay. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MP Chong. We now go to MP Rob Oliphant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses. I apologize for not being present. Some family obligations kept me working from home today. But I'm really glad. I don't know whether you're really aware that this is the start of our Arctic foreign policy study. And I think it's really quite wonderful that we are starting the policy with the Inuit Nunavut. And I think that is very important. It's also key that you're an international organization. The ICC is an international organization representing Inuit peoples from Alaska through to Russia. As an Inuit international organization, as opposed to ITK or others that are national organizations, what do you see your role in fostering dialogue among Inuit people in different countries? How does that work, and what could Canada learn from it?
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Mr. Oliphant. Well, since you can't be here, maybe you can meet us in Reykjavik for the Arctic Circle, where we're going to meet with other Arctic ambassadors. And
I was just talking about that
yeah.
today. As a matter of fact, in October, that it is a possibility.
Well, we hope that you can make it. Back to your question. I think our role, but we know that our role at ICC here is to collaborate with other Inuit in other countries, which we do regularly. We have quarterly meetings, and also we seem to be sort of the connector between Inuit, other Indigenous peoples around the world, other Arctic Indigenous peoples as well too. So we find that we become a conduit, and actually a very useful one, to ensure that. When it comes to Arctic issues, that we're in fact ensuring that the protection and safety of our fellow Canadians is first and foremost everywhere we go. So in a way, that sovereignty, working at its best to ensure that we can collaborate and coordinate together with other Arctic states, other Arctic countries, and other Indigenous peoples around the world who have an interest in the Arctic. I hope that's what I'm looking to continue.
On that, I want to look at the connection or nexus between sovereignty or among sovereignty, prosperity, economic development, and the environment, and how you are seeing the ICC particularly taking on those questions of economic development for the peoples of the four countries.
Thank you for that. What we do, sometimes we have forums, we have gatherings, and a lot of times we bring, first and foremost, even the policies within Canada itself are almost difficult, impossible to work with. I think COVID sort of, and the geopolitical state of this world sort of showed us that. First, right up front. But we find that utilizing the Inuit treaty organizations, for them to work collaboratively together to ensure that they are the business people, and what we can do to support them and bring them where we need to is really important. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're sort of a conduit and one who can sort of give a safe place and the right moment and opportunity to bring everybody together who needs to be there. So having the right people at the table is very key. First and foremost, that's the most important thing to develop some sound policy, especially when it comes to the economic world.
I'm quite proud of the 2019 strategy as the first co-developed strategy really in Canada that was integrally co-developed with Indigenous peoples and the Government of Canada. And when we brought out the Foreign Policy Review last year, 2024, it had become sacred to not change anything that had been co-developed. And as I had consultations in the North, I saw a difference in 6 years. Have you seen a difference in 6 years in the way the respect is happening? I know there's more to be done, but and I'm not looking for a pat on the back. I'm just looking, is it effective? Is something attitudinally changed in the way we're doing things?
I think it's if anything, it's likely improved for us. We notice a difference when we see the services in the communities, we see business happening in the regions, and also planning together. A big difference. And yeah, pat you on the back right now for sure. You've done a good job. And I'd have to say that we're sort of in the best place right now that we possibly can be. Consultation is quite key for us, ensuring that anything that is developed or co-developed. When it comes to co-development, I come from a co-management world in the marine environment, and the work that we have done with Canada is actually quite amazing and sort of leading around this world. So Canada's come a long ways in ensuring that co-management and co-development are sound and key, and not changing what you've created with Indigenous people is actually quite a respectful way to do business in itself. So I think it's been good.
I hope to get to Reykjavik.
Thank you, MP Oliphant, and thank you to our witnesses, President Nakim Mayak and Dr. Kennedy, for your testimony and for appearing for this study. This concludes this portion of the meeting. We will suspend briefly so that we can welcome the next set of witnesses. Merci beaucoup. our witnesses for the second hour. They are appearing by video conference. First is Dr. P. Whitney Lackenbauer, Professor, Canada's Research Chair in the Study of the Canadian North, Trent University, and Dr. Christian Lupprecht, Professor, Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University, both by video conference. As I said, up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. And I now invite Dr. Lackenbauer to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the chance to appear before the committee today. We find ourselves in a world of intensifying geostrategic competition, and certainly Arctic affairs have felt the effects of this over the last few years. And today, the prospects for truly circumpolar cooperation are constrained by geopolitical realities. We think back to 2019 in the Arctic Northern Policy Framework. Russia was framed as a potential Arctic partner. Now it is clearly acknowledged as an adversary with whom there can be no business as usual, given its brutal full-scale invasion of Ukraine and its abject disregard for sovereignty.
I'm so sorry, Chair. It is somewhat difficult for interpreters to follow at this speed, so if the speaker could slow down a bit.
Very happily.
Interpreters, yeah.
Yeah, and disregard for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and international law, and what we've seen in the war in Europe. And any lingering ideas about Arctic exceptionalism, that the region is inherently insulated from global geopolitical dynamics, are now very out of date in my view. So I disagree fundamentally with Dr. Kennedy, who appeared earlier on this particular point. Canada's Arctic Foreign Policy Statement, released last December, has three general intentions: asserting Canada's sovereignty, advancing our interests in the region, and promoting a stable, prosperous, and secure North. These are long-standing priorities, but how we are advancing our interests and promoting stability and security is what's changing. So flowing from this, I want to take a few minutes to lay out what I see as the key elements of Canada's Arctic foreign policy. They're the same as before, what has changed, and then what is new. So what's the same? The desire for Arctic state primacy is a longstanding priority, insisting that the Arctic states are best positioned and equipped to understand the region and its peoples. And reiterating that Canada remains committed to upholding the rules-based international order in the Arctic, and that maritime claims are addressed in a manner consistent with international law, gestures to the legality of our longstanding position on the Northwest Passage as historic internal waters. It also speaks to our submission in support of our extended continental shelf. We can talk more about sovereignty later, but Canada's position is strong, it's longstanding, and I see no need or benefits to revisit or revise it substantively. Let's show some confidence. There is the promise to secure Canada's national interests and ensure stability and prosperity for Indigenous peoples who live in the Arctic. All recent governments have had a similar strategic intent, going back to Jean Chrétien and even before. We see the United States framed as Canada's greatest ally and our closest partner and ally in the Arctic. So our foreign policy reinforces how close partnership with the Americans is essential to maintain a secure, strong, well-defended North American homeland on which our mutual prosperity depends. Obviously, the re-election of Donald Trump has injected uncertainty into the mix, which we'll discuss later. We also retain language designating the Arctic Council as the preeminent forum for Arctic cooperation, while explaining that some of the high politics in the meetings remain on pause. We heard in the last session about climate change as a central theme, characterized as both the most pressing and the most proximate threat to Canada's security in the Arctic. But I think the linkages between climate change and national security remain vague, and we might talk about that. Furthermore, the policy adopts a whole of government or a whole of society framework, acknowledging that if we're going to address the complex range of threats facing the Arctic, we can't only conceptualize security in military terms. So this entails working with Public Safety Canada, Minister Blair, your former portfolio, of course, right, to support efforts to strengthen Canadian national resilience, to counter malign influence and activities of foreign powers, to strengthen defense of critical infrastructure and protect northern communities against foreign interference. All of this is very important. To me, these are the kinds of issues that are the clear and present danger that we're facing as Canadians. So what has changed? We are now explicit in acknowledging the relevance and importance of NATO in the Arctic region. And talk of protecting the alliance's northern and western flanks opens up some new areas for thinking about the Arctic in securing alliance territory more generally. Russia, as I said, is now a competitor that we're stating seeks to undermine the rules-based international order. China is now positioned as a non-Arctic state competitor and a challenger to Arctic state supremacy, that we can expect to use all the tools at its disposal to advance its geopolitical interests, including in the Arctic. So lots of concern about China deploying dual-use research vessels and surveillance platforms to collect data, as well as actions that represent malign economic influence. Yet at the same time, our policy is mature in leaving space for pragmatic diplomacy, where we're challenging China, where we ought to, and then also able to cooperate where interests align, such as addressing pressing global issues like climate change that have impacts on the Arctic.
Thank you.
We also astutely note that while the risk of military attack is low, the region represents a geographic vector for traditional and emerging weapons systems. This is not new, but we're now much more attentive that adversaries and competitors are employing disinformation and influence campaigns, malicious cyber operations, espionage, foreign interference that target Canadians, including Northerners. This cannot be ignored. And I love that we include the Coast Guard as a partner in defense and security and its important role in domain awareness. So I'll have to save for question and answer what I see as new in this, but for there, that'll get us started. And over to you, Dr. Lupprecht.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I now invite Dr. Lackenbauer to make an opening statement about, Dr. Lupprecht to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, et bonjour.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon to all colleagues on the committee, whom I respect tremendously. My remarks will be made in English, but I would invite you to put questions in the official language of your choice.
Conference, which is organized biannually by the Scandinavian Journal of Military Studies on behalf of the military universities in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. I also bring extensive comparative expertise on matters on the Arctic and Arctic foreign policy among allied and partner countries, including my book entitled Polar Cousins, Comparing Antarctic and Arctic Geostrategic Futures. February 2026. Russia has landed troops on Svalbard. At the same time, Russia is dropping platoons of soldiers near CFB Alert, while a Chinese supposedly research vessel is providing logistics and drone coverage. Is Canada ready for provocation? The Canadian Armed Forces has been tasked with being ready, resilient, and relevant to detect, deter, defend, and defeat accelerating threats to Canada and Canada's national interests. At the same time, the Inflection Point 2025 document by the Canadian Army observes our stretched force, purpose-built for employment on contribution warfare missions for the last several decades, has resulted in an army that is currently postured for presence in competition, but challenged for crisis and unprepared for conflict due to the lack of critical enablers, sustainment, depth, and focus. Why is this a problem for Arctic sovereignty? First, countries need policy enablers. Earlier this year, Canada released a robust and timely Arctic foreign policy, but the fundamental problem with the policy is that it reflects a broader challenge, that in this country, we build policy backwards. If Canada had a national security strategy, then other relevant policies would flow from the national security strategy. But without a national security strategy, there's no shared understanding, no unity of purpose and effort, no coherence within and across government and its departments. That reflects the broader failure of Canada and allies over the past 25 years. We had no vision, We left international security up to the Americans, and now we're surprised and complain about the world we live in. Canada's Arctic foreign policy reflects the same problems Canada is facing in so many other areas of foreign policy. We do not have the initiative. The Arctic foreign policy is an acknowledgement that Canada must regain the initiative. Canada's sovereignty is measured by Canada's ability and capability to shape the environment rather than simply having to react to it. The government likes to tout investments it is making in Arctic security, defense, and foreign policy, but the problem is that the threat vectors across the Arctic are accelerating, while the rules-based international order is atrophying. Infrastructure investments in the Arctic cost about 10 times what they cost in southern Canada. That models from the south don't apply in the north, which means the closest comparators are not found in Canada, but among other Arctic allies. And that with respect to the United States, the Arctic has always been an area of contestation, going back to at least the Alaska boundary dispute. So the best return on those investments we can hope for is to preserve the status quo, but given the changing character of the Arctic, preserving the status quo is not an option. In having to invest more for a low rate of return, the Arctic is a laboratory for Canadian foreign policy more broadly. On the one hand, due to structural, domestic, and geopolitical challenges, Canada's interests are increasingly diverging from those of the United States. On the other hand, the European Union and Europe is becoming a more autarkic actor. Canada is left with two stark choices: draw even closer to the United States by default, or invest more in Canadian foreign policy and foreign policy instruments in the hopes of continuing to assert Canada's interests as a middle power by partnering with Europe in counterbalancing the vagaries of U.S. unilateralism and global headwinds. Security is job one for any government, and the Arctic is Canada's top priority theater before the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions. It is not just about protecting Canadian sovereignty, but for Canadians to realize that if North America is not safe and secure, then Canada's ability to make sovereign decisions that best reflect Canadian interests will be compromised, as will the ability of the United States to provide extended nuclear deterrence, which would result in global nuclear proliferation. As a result, the Arctic foreign policy is not just about investing in Canadian sovereignty, but in continental security and global stability, and therefore an investment in NATO. Canadian politicians have traditionally done a poor job at explaining to our European allies the value of Canada's investments in NATO's North American pillar. The government also needs to explain to Canadians that the Arctic is no longer a zone of perennial peace. The Arctic is now in play as a zone of adversarial competition and rivalry. What Canada does or does not do in the Arctic has national, continental, allied, and global ramifications. Arctic foreign policy and related efforts to secure Canada's Arctic sovereignty are not discretionary. If it fails, so will Canada.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lupprecht, for your opening statement. I now turn to my colleagues for the questions, beginning with MP Michael Chong. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. I asked the previous panelists the same question. Are you familiar at all with some of the proposals to build high-speed internet submarinal cables between Europe and North America and Europe and Asia through the Canadian Arctic? In particular, I'm thinking about a project that I understand is being proposed or being by a group of companies from Finland, the United States, and Japan that would go through parts of the Canadian Arctic, and I believe that project is called the Far North Fiber Project. Are you, either one of you, familiar with this? Okay, maybe you could speak to it.
Yeah, happily. Yeah, certainly as a suite of fiber projects. We certainly see a lot of fiber already existent in the European high north and Arctic. Certainly in the Baltic region, you see many of those strands already strung across. So certainly we've seen proposals on the Canadian side are running through connecting Europe to Asia. These have been on the books for quite some time. We see on the Russian side, I think you mentioned this in the last one, Polar Express, for example, connecting Murmansk to Vladivostok as proposals. What I think is interesting is in these different scenarios, single strands of fiber are things that can be disrupted by a deliberate anchor dragging or an inadvertent anchor dragging or other kinds of disruption. So we're also thinking about
that was going to be my next question. We've seen disruptions in the Baltic Sea and elsewhere of submarine internet cables that carry, these cables. These submarine cables, I understand, carry a majority of the world's global internet traffic.
Yes.
What capacity do we have or do we need, if we don't have it, to monitor subsurface movements of nefarious actors who would drag an anchor or otherwise to cut these cables?
Yeah, I mean, right now, these are difficult. I'll turn over to you, Dr. Luprecht, in just a sec, but difficult because they're often low signature, very difficult to attribute. Benefits is if we see these as part of a suite of different communication systems from seabed to outer space, these are adding redundancy to satellites. We need to also be thinking about redundancy and duplication. That's strategic and deliberate when we're deploying these systems. But I think the question is very much directed in the right direction, which is if we're building infrastructure, if we're making these investments, we also need to think about how we're defending this infrastructure and making sure that that's built right into the plans from the onset.
Sorry, I have a second quick question because I don't have unlimited time. Part of the government's Arctic foreign policy is to assert Canada's sovereignty. The defense policy also has made the Arctic a big focus. In early 2022, just 3 years ago, both Canada and Finland both announced the purchase of F-35 jets. Finland, I believe, about 64 jets, and Canada indicated its intention to purchase 88. To that end, both the Finns and the Canadians are preparing training and facilities in the far north to welcome the arrival of those jets. But the Auditor General has indicated that that Canada is behind schedule, years behind schedule, and won't be operational with the F-35s till at least 2033, 2034. Finland, a much smaller country, purchasing almost the same number of jets, is going to be fully operational in 2030 with these jets in the far north. So I'm just wondering, what are the Finns doing that allows them to purchase almost the same number of jets with a fraction of the resources we have? I think they're a country of some 4 million people, and get them operational in 2030, where we're years behind schedule in a country 10 times the resources and people and economy that the Finns have. Like, what are we doing? What are they doing that we are not doing to make this happen?
Well, look, in Finland, there's a broad consensus in terms of the need to defend the country. This is a country that can surge to 400,000 soldiers in a matter of weeks. It has 4,000 artillery pieces that it can marshal. And this is a country where there's a broad multi-partisan consensus in the way you conduct security, defense, and foreign policy, and in ways that does not politicize them for partisan gain. It is also the country that probably has the most advanced, other than the United States, ways of trying to protect their underwater critical infrastructure. The Finnish Institute of International Affairs has done exceptional work, and the former president, who's now the chair of the European Center, the Hybrid Threat sort of center, she's, in my view, one of the absolute best people in the world on this. So it's a country that, if you're living next to Russia and you've had the experience Finland has, you take your security and your defense seriously, and it has the political cover and the will and the strategy, as I pointed out in my opening remarks, which is what we're missing, and we're just doing it piecemeal here and there.
Yeah, certainly happy to jump in on this as well. I think looking at the F-35, I think it is incumbent upon Canada to make a decision, stick by the decision it's made. It's important right now to have transparency and certainty within an alliance construct. And these are obviously going to be pretty serious investments in creating and laying out the enabling infrastructure in the north. This is going to be different than the forward operating locations that we had for CF-18s. If we look across to Eielson Air Force Base and the infrastructure housing F-35s in the United States, these are ultra secure facilities, right? These are absolutely the most advanced airframes and sensor suites that you can imagine. These are not going to be dual use type facilities that we're building. This is going to be dedicated military infrastructure. And in order to have that in place in time, when we actually receive these airframes, we need to start now in working out the relationships and getting that infrastructure built and getting the right sort of relationships in place to making sure they're secured and that we're able to actually make the most out of this very important investment that we're making.
Thank you very much. Before I proceed to MP Blair, I just want to remind the members and the witnesses to speak a little slower for the benefit of the interpreters. Next, we will go to MP Bill Blair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to both of our guests, Dr. Lachenbauer and Dr. Luprecht. Good to see you again, Christian. We've had many opportunities to have conversations in the past. It's nice in this format. If I may, I wanted to comment, first of all, we haven't spoken very much about the defense policy update that was released in April of 2025, that I think, because it was entitled actually "Our North Strong and Free," and it did focus on a number of things. I will share with you as well, Dr. Luprecht, that our policy work on that was informed in part by your own work in making Canada's Arctic security paradigm fit for purpose. And we talked a lot about the impact of climate change, the new technologies that were making our North far more accessible. But we also talked about the activities of our adversaries in particular, for China and Russia, and some of the things that we were doing. And I think it was really important to acknowledge those challenges. But one of the things that I have also learned in my fairly extensive work on defense in the Arctic is, when I've gone to the Arctic and I've gone to people that live in those communities, particularly the Inuit, and you talk about defending sovereignty and what does that mean to them? They say it does not mean a fighter jet occasionally flying by, and it does not mean a ship once in a while sailing through when the ice is out. What it actually means for them is infrastructure, significant investment in infrastructure. And they talk about airport runways and highways and fiber optics and water treatment plants and power generation plants and significant investments which could be multi-use for those communities. And of course, that presents a fairly significant challenge for us as well. And so I'd sort of like your take on where we should be spending our money first. And as you've seen, quite recently, the Prime Minister in June of this year made a commitment at the NATO summit in The Hague to significantly expand our defense expenditure. And additionally, there was an additional commitment there to raise it over the next several years to as much as 5%. 1.5% of that is an investment primarily in nation-building infrastructure, which has a security component. So I think that, and let me also agree with you that we've gone through decades of underinvestment in our national security, and I think that was born in large part by complacency. We were surrounded by three oceans, one of which was mostly frozen most of the time. We also shared our only land border with a benign superpower. Our complacency, I think, was based on a pretty fair expectation of how things would continue, but they've clearly changed. And so I'd like your input on how we might best make our significant investments, $9 billion extra this year, and in every subsequent year, it'll actually increase, the increase in defense spending. What's the best way to invest that money?
Mr. Blair, as you know, I have great respect for the work that you've done in that department. It's a very unwieldy department that, as you know, I have lots of experience myself in. I think the first thing is we need to think about the effects we want to achieve. And I think this is always a challenge in terms of trying to make sure we're targeted with the payoffs, and we're able to explain those payoffs also to our allies, because as you know, I spend lots of time in Europe, and nobody counts what Canada does in the North really as an investment in NATO, and the importance of the infrastructure. I also share your view that on the critical infrastructure, the first point I always make when we talk about Arctic security, and you talk to locals in the North, they'll tell you their first priority isn't the Russians showing up. It's food security and other elements of human security, and how we can use infrastructure to both improve the lives of our Canadian citizens that share that territory, and at the same time leverage that for our purpose of sovereignty. Look, I think one of the challenges that we're going to have, I think we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. That the amount of money that we're spending on infrastructure and defense and so forth, if we do not spend this well, and we do not spend it to considerable effect for national sovereignty and for the benefit of Canadian society and Canadians, I think there will be a reckoning from the Canadian electorate. And so if we're going to spend these amounts of money, I think these are exactly the questions that we need to ask. And I worry that we might be spending too much money too quickly with too little of a concrete plan of what we're actually looking to get for that money in the medium and the long term.
Yeah, by all means. First of all, I agree that we talked a lot about spending, but we need to talk about investing and think about what's the return on that investment. Dr. Lachenbauer.
Thanks. I think, first of all, we need to get clarity, too, on what we're discussing when we're talking about Arctic sovereignty and security. We have sovereignty. No one has a better claim to ownership over Canada than Canadians. Our sovereignty is nested with Indigenous sovereignties, intermingling with those of our state through our land claim agreements, and so on. I think we create more uncertainty about our sovereignty than many external actors do. So disentangle that from security and ask the question, what type of security threat are we focusing on? We've got threats through the Arctic. Threats that would emanate from outside of our Arctic would pass over or through to strike at targets outside of the region. This is investments in domain awareness. This is NORAD modernization. Much of this is dedicated critical military infrastructure, much of which will not have dual use. When it comes to threats to the Arctic, and I disagree with Dr. Luprecht, it is not Russian Spetsnaz units landing outside of CFS Alert. I spent almost the entire month of July on an operation with the Canadian Rangers, Operation Nanook Takunik, on northern Ellesmere Island. I'm not worried about an invasion of land forces on northern Ellesmere. What I am worried about are a whole bunch of interference activities and other ways that nefarious foreign actors may seek to influence or undermine Canadians' ability, including Northern rights holders' abilities, to influence and chart our desired future direction. So here's where I think investments in other security departments and agencies are absolutely essential, as much as coordinating with defense. When it comes to the in threats, NATO's 7 baseline requirements for national resilience give us a really nice hook in how we can make smart strategic investments with that 1.5% of GDP.
Thank you, Professor.
That's helping us to meet our obligations.
We're over time, so I'll
thank you, doctors.
Go next to MP Simard. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Merci.
Mr. Simard, you have 6 minutes. Thank you for your presentations, gentlemen. I also see from your body language that you're extremely passionate about these issues. I have a question that might take you elsewhere. I normally sit on the Natural Resources Committee. It is an area of interest for me. The federal government wants to be part of a critical mineral bank that would serve NATO countries. So Canada's north is very rich in critical minerals. Are you aware of this at all? And I'd like your comments, given that Russia and China are the primary producers of rare earths and do a lot of dumping. That makes it difficult to engage in mining projects because they bring down prices. So there is a discussion about establishing a floor price to put a stop to that. Aren't there risks? You were talking about interference. Aren't there risks that Russian companies or Chinese companies could be donors for some of these projects, even projects here in Canada? I would like to have your views on this, particularly on the critical minerals and rare earths and their significance, their strategic significance.
Le problème avec les minéraux critiques dans le Grand Nord.
The problem with critical minerals in the far north, as you know, is that costs often exceed the profitability of mines in the far north, and that given the infrastructure needed, they're often not cost effective. So yes, we believe that Canada could contribute, but what it requires is a national strategy that can make those investments profitable for the private sector, and that is linked to Mr. Blair's comments. That means we would need to provide the infrastructure that would also serve to improve the well-being of local communities and provide critical resources to our allies and contribute to our defense and security, national defense and security. So as you must have noticed during my initial remarks, I have some doubt that the integrated strategy, comprehensive strategy we require to align all these components is actually what's envisaged. Mr. Luckenbauer, on the same theme, could you also comment, please?
Focusing on, because these are risks that are not just hypothetical, they're very real. And I think a lot of our attention for the last few years has been looking at foreign-owned entities purchasing outright entire mining operations and then controlling and dictating flows. I think what we've seen play out in one case in particular, about 100 kilometers east of Yellowknife, was it's about controlling supply chains and value chains, as you're mentioning, Mr. Simard, that it's sometimes as advantageous, or say China with its monopoly, to keep those critical minerals in the ground as it is to actually extract them, that it's having that offtake and making sure that we do not have the refining and processing capabilities in Canada or friendly countries to control that value chain. So here's where I think it's both looking collectively with allies to invest and share the risk associated with the costs of extracting these minerals and refining them, but also leveraging tools like the Investment Canada Act, that in my mind is one of the primary instruments of asserting Canada's sovereignty. It's a different way. It's not an icebreaker hull in the water or a CF-18 flying in the skies, but it's still a way of us asserting our right to control activities in our jurisdiction. And here, if we are serious both about a green transition and about accessing latest defense technologies and contributing to those supply chains, it's incumbent upon us to really move in terms of critical minerals and act upon that strategy that's been articulated.
Merci beaucoup. Si vous avez,
Thank you very much. If you have recommendation on and documents that you could provide to the committee, it would be useful for us, even for studies that we're conducting on the Natural Resources Committee. I'd like to know whether, in your opinion, it's reasonable to think that NATO might agree to set a floor price for some critical minerals to kick off that kind of projects. I've heard of that as a possibility. But is there a structured initiative among NATO countries on rare earths, to your knowledge?
Wait, I'll just have a quick comment. À mon avis, on a la même problématique dans le Grand
In
Nord.
my view, we have the same problem in the far north as we have in the rest of Canada. Too many regulations make it very difficult to invest in projects in Canada. I've just spent 6 months in Brussels with close contacts and people from the EU. So Europe believes that Canada is a very difficult country in which to do business.
It's also fair to say that some of these initiatives have certainly been under discussion at NATO. One of the challenges is right now we've had, let's call it what it is, a rogue actor in Washington who's disrupted, I think, a lot of the opportunity space to be able to focus and channel on what are these strategic priorities. So perhaps putting in that that guaranteed floor price is one mechanism. I just hope that we return to a situation where we are working together collectively to make sure that we are protecting these supply chains, recognizing that's key to our self-determining future.
Thank you very much. We'll next go to MP Ziad Abou Taif. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks for the witnesses. Dr. Lackenbauer, you just gave me my first question. We were told that, and we were convinced that we need to work with our allies as far as the Arctic, and the closest allies at this point is the United States. The Alaska summit between President Putin and President Trump, without knowing any details, I'm not sure if you have any details or any reading to that, has become a concern over what is going to be the relationship and the policy over the Arctic. Our policy was introduced December 2024. The summit happened last month. So I would like to know from both of you, from yourself and Dr. Lupprecht, on what do you think of the position of the United States and how that strategy is going to play or make it difficult for Canada to continue implementing and protecting Canada's interest in the North?
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question. So first of all, our desired end state, to be clear, is for some of the craziness in Washington to calm down so we can get back to our core relationship with the United States that serves both of our national interests. What is going on in the signals that we have been receiving from Washington make no sense from an interest-based approach to the world. So my first suggestion is it's hard, but we need to demonstrate strategic patience in the short term, put our well-warranted emotional frustrations aside, and recognize that what we actually desire is building forward where we get back to stability and more certainty and respect. That I believe will come. But belief can be a dangerous thing in a world of interests and some of the actors we're dealing with. Key thing is, I think it's essential that we look at and articulate what we bring to the table in the continental defense equation so that we start to speak with more confidence about what we contribute to NORAD. We are not simply a passive recipient of American security guarantees. The commitments that we've made with Arctic over-the-horizon radar, polar over-the-horizon radar, different sensor systems that we're deploying are going to be integral to North American defense. If we cover off what's described often as 10-2, it allows the Americans to focus on the Atlantic and the Pacific directions of, or vectors of attack to North America. So still, when sober minds prevail in all of this, I think everything points towards us being good, reliable allies working together. We want to make sure that we're preserving NORAD as a binational command, but we also need to realize that there have been some issues of trust that have been arisen, and we also need to be quietly in safe spaces, considering and contemplating scenarios that we probably wouldn't have talked about in polite company a couple of years ago. Namely, how are we prepared to defend ourselves if our key guarantor is interested in protecting itself, but maybe not us?
So look, I have a slightly different take on this.
Dr. Lupprecht.
We've not been very good at following 100 years of precedent of making sure that we counterbalance against the vagaries of U.S. unilateralism that come and go. And this is why the question by Monsieur Simard is so important, because Canada needs to add value to Europe to ensure that Europe remains a key partner for Canada going into the future. A more autarkic Europe means Canada has no choice but to draw closer to the United States. And in light of what we're observing, it needs to be an urgent reminder that doing things that might be interesting ideologically or in terms of ideas or some electoral groups in the country ultimately do not serve the national interest. And that governing by polls, that means that we are not actually governing by the national need of this country. And the national need of this country is to make sure that we have in Europe a reliable partner with whom we can govern the Arctic and with whom we can counterbalance on the North American continent, precisely because the phenomena that Dr. Lackenbauer talks about come and go, and we were not ready, and we saw it coming. My colleague Kim Nossel wrote an entire book about it, published in 2023. It laid out line by line what the Trump administration was going to do, and yet we decided in this country we were instead going to be caught with our pants down.
Do you think, do you believe...
10 seconds left.
10
yeah,
seconds.
Go ahead.
Do you believe that the current policy reflect on United States position or United States strategy?
Very brief response, please. Thank you.
So, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
The question is, do you believe that the current policy, Canada policy, that December 2024 reflects on the strategic position of the United States and what we've seen from the administration down there?
I would have lobbied for a much more aggressive policy when it comes to the Arctic. I think we are still in a moment where we think we have 5 or 10 years to build out Canadian greater sovereignty, and we need a much more rapid accelerant, especially when it comes to the Arctic.
I think it largely gets it right. I think we need to be instilled by a sense of urgency, not of crisis, which leads us to override democratic processes and things that are core to our values as Canadians.
Thank you very much. We will next go to MP Van der Belt. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this really important testimony that you've both given today. I'd like to start my questions with Professor Lachenbauer. I noted that in your opening remarks, you just started when you were talking about the whole of government to talk about the Coast Guard and bringing the Coast Guard into the defense team. I wonder if you could say what you were planning to say about that. I'm quite curious.
Sure, I'll keep that nice and succinct. I think this is welcome. I think it allows us to signal outward that this is part of our broader security equities as a country. I think we sometimes forget that we do have a highly capable Coast Guard that in a global context is not on parity with the Russians because we're not asking our Coast Guard to do comparable things to what the Russians ask their Coast Guard to do. But having it assume more of a constabulary role, which is a shift in culture and will take adjustments in the Coast Guard, is something that to me fits with the tenor of the times. So I think we'll have to have sensitivity as a country to make sure that as that agency is adjusting, it's able to retain that culture that's made it so effective in the past, but that moving forward, we now bundle that together and in our mental way of conceptualizing security, we'll also include that in all these suite of different platforms and sensors that we have out there. The Coast Guard are also eyes and ears, within Canadian territory, just like our Canadian Rangers are.
And that leads perfectly to my next question. I know that you are quite the expert when it comes to the Canadian Rangers. Are we using that to the maximum potential that we could be? Is there anything we should be doing with the Canadian Rangers more in this current environment?
Yeah, thanks. I think it was laid out in Strong, Secure, Engage 2017, the defense policy, which said we should be investing resources in improving the training and effectiveness of the Rangers, which means, and this isn't very exciting on a strategic level, make sure that there are the right pay clerks in place at their different headquarters to make sure that they're paid on time, make sure that they have training opportunities and abilities to get out on the land. It does not require a fundamental retooling of the Canadian Rangers. They serve as really key force enablers and force multipliers if we need to send kinetic forces, combat forces up to the north, but enable them to be those eyes, ears, and those voices of the north in the military and of the military in the north.
And you also talked about, you spent a lot of time talking about different kinds of hybrid threats. We know what those threats are to all of Canada, but what is peculiar and special about the threats that particularly impact the North and the Arctic?
Christian, I'll go quick on this one and hand it over to you. I think it's that there are so many single points of failure. So without a lot of redundancy in terms of infrastructure, it means that whether it's a deliberate act of espionage or interference, or whether it's a natural disaster, disruptions can happen in ways that down south we would have alternate routes or alternate mechanisms of mitigating the risks associated. We also need to think about extremes of weather and in the winter. And if an electric generator goes down, as it did in Penartuk and Pangnirtung, a little more than a decade ago, right, how that represents a very acute human security crisis different. Well, we've had ice storms in southern Canada, so I won't dismiss that either. But when you're dealing with minus 40s and minus 50s conditions, right, this takes on a whole different imperative. So I think that that's partly it. It's also really thinking about what vulnerabilities exist in terms of polarization. What are the friction points within our democratic systems that adversaries may want to go and exploit? And we want to make sure that Canadians are protected, where we can have those difficult democratic discussions amongst ourselves and know that they're not being influenced or manipulated by outsiders.
I think what I take away also from Dr. Lachenbauer is hybrid are a means to an end. And the end for our adversaries is to impose strategic dilemmas on us. And what we're seeing from Russia is the ability to impose multiple strategic dilemmas in multiple domains at the same time. Land, air, maritime, subsurface, cyber, space, aerospace. And are we prepared? Are we posturing ourselves in our way to be able to be resilient, to be able to detect, to deter, and if necessary, defend against these multiple strategic dilemmas? So that's, I think, more in terms of how I'd be thinking about that hybrid environment and our ability to contain it. And with regards to the Coast Guard, one minor sort of amendment. The opportunity space here is, of course, if we're going to change the mandate and the posture of the Coast Guard, we also effectively need to retrain much of the senior leadership corps. And so bringing it into national defense provides an opportunity for professional development, because it's nice to have some equipment that can do some of the constabulary job. But if you don't have people who understand what the constabulary mission is and how to execute it, we're not going to be able to achieve the effects that the government is looking for.
Thank you, Professor. Next, we'll go to MP Simard. Vous avez 2 minutes, point 5.
Merci.
Mr. Simard, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. This is very interesting what you're saying, gentlemen. But at the same time, it's concerning. You talked about a multifactorial strategic dilemma. If we need to deal with Russia and China and the US, who have far greater means than does Canada, with the onset of AI, advent of AI, that changes too. So what measures, tangible measures, could Canada take that it has the means to take to at least partly respond to some of those strategic dilemma? And that can take into account the advent and deployment of AI.
Donc, certainement, on aura toujours donc des...
We will always have limited capacity, and that's why we need partnerships with other countries, like countries in the EU, and also with Indo-Pacific partners, close partners like Australia, Japan, Korea, countries that we often forget as we look at the world, because each of them already has skills and capabilities. We're talking about Finland. It is a small country but has huge capability to deal with hybrid threats and attacks. So that sort of cooperation will be very helpful.
That Russia and China were developing very sophisticated escalation ladders. And what much of the rest of NATO missed is the ability to respond to those escalation ladders. And so now that we need to build out these capabilities, we can only do it together with our partners.
Very quick rapid fire here. Not quick for the interpreters, just short, succinct statements. First of all, I think we need to realize that our people and preparing populations for the world that we face, not the world we wish we faced, requires investments in building up societal resilience. Here's where we can learn from our Nordic partners, and I very much echo Dr. Luprecht's spirit of reaching out to like-minded nations in Europe and leveraging more of those relationships. The second, we need to get ahead of our adversaries and stop talking about every deficit and shortcoming that we have in Canada and project a message of strength as well. Believe it or not, we do a lot of things very well in Canada. We have industry that is very capable and contributes to high-tech tech supply chains. I think we need to do a job of realizing the world has shifted. We as Canadians love to beat up ourselves and downplay ourselves. And we do it in an Arctic space to try and embarrass the sitting government into spending more resources into the north. I think the time is for us to actually go through a bit of a culture shift and realize what we need to do now is up our game for strategic messaging and operate from a position of strength.
Thank you very much, Professor. We will go next to MP Elena Conans. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. All right, let me have that back. Thank you. I know we don't have a lot of time left. But just a question about, I guess, technology and the use of, for example, drones out in the Arctic. Is that being used now, or is that something that we need to invest in more or in at all?
So yes and yes is the short answer. It is definitely being trialed. I think there's still a lot of experimentation that's going on. Obviously, a big challenge in the north relates to power generation, right? Cold temperatures and batteries deteriorate in terms of the powering. So some of that in terms of the distances that drones can operate, other anomalies associated with the electromagnetic spectrum in very high latitudes. So I think this is an area where Canada is well positioned, both drones that are in the air, but also underwater drones. We really have been world leaders for quite a long time in underwater autonomous vehicles. And I think as well, looking at opportunities that Canadian space, what Canadian geography affords as an area for experimentation, testing, and trialing of some of these new technologies. Some of our European allies, by virtue of geography, are very proximate to key competitors and adversaries. So I think we can also sell ourselves as a place where the world should want to come and test out some of their emerging technologies in our very diversified northern and Arctic environments and see what those capabilities look like.
And it reminds us that an investment in defense is an investment in innovation, in research and technology in the 21st century. I have no particular dog in this race, but look at a company in Europe called Helsing, for instance, that has understood it's not just about the drones, it's about the algorithms behind those drones. And so for Canada to invest in algorithms for democracy, and how we harness our high-tech skills. We have universities that produce fantastically cutting-edge work, but we've done a very poor job at integrating them with the overall national security and defense enterprise.
That's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony and appearing for this study. That concludes this meeting. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.